Today we're going to talk about a film camera that's nearly 50 years old, and that is the Canon FTb-N QL. This camera was released in 1973 and was preceded by the original FT in 1966 and the Canon FTb in 1971. Here's the camera right here. The differences between this and the FTb model that came before it are a few design changes and a few functional changes, including the shutter speed display in the viewfinder, a larger shutter button, a plastic tip on the film advance lever, a slightly redesigned shutter speed dial, and a redesigned self-timer stop-down lever. Both FTb models had improved metering over the original FT. This camera and the FTb camera that came before it had a handful of similarities to the Canon F1, or at least the first two models of the Canon F1. And as you can see, the body sizes are similar, and there's some similar design language on the dials and levers as well. Obviously, the Canon F1 was the top of the line SLR at the time for them, but this FTb QL was a very capable camera and still is. I'll go through some of the pros and cons of this camera, and then I'll give a general overview of my thoughts on it. So first off, the positives. One of the biggest positives is the fact that it's completely mechanical. It only needs a battery to operate the internal metering system. It has a large and clear viewfinder experience, and in that viewfinder it shows the shutter speed, which is another positive. Another positive that you'll find in the viewfinder is this simplistic but extremely useful match needle metering system. Another cool thing about the viewfinder that I like is the microprism focusing screen. That microprism focusing screen in here is really easy for me to use and get focus with. Another positive that I haven't really taken advantage of, but it's good to know that it's on here, is the fact that the eyepiece can take accessories. So Canon made a handful of viewfinder eyepiece accessories for this. Although I haven't used it yet, it's nice to know that it's capable, and if I ever find some of these accessories, I might give it a shot. The build quality of this is a huge positive. Nearly every piece of this camera is made of some sort of metal. So this camera is about as rugged and tough as they come because of that build quality. And you can feel that quality throughout, from the shutter button to the film advance lever to the shutter speed dial. And last but not least, on the positives, is a huge one for me. It's just one of the features I really like about this camera, is the quick loading feature, which is what the QL stands for. Unlike other film cameras where you manually feed the film into the sprocket on the right side, all you have to do here is pull the film out so the edge of it is touching that red painted area, and then carefully close that silver part on top, and then close the back. Take a shot, advance, take a shot, advance, until the film counter is starting to count, and then you're good to go. Being able to load film quickly like that, I think, is really cool. I'm kind of curious why they didn't add that into any of the F1 models. I guess because maybe they thought the pros don't need it. I'm not sure, but to me, that's a really handy feature. And some form of that found its way to the cameras of the future, starting with their T-series, and then obviously the EOS film cameras and other autofocus film cameras have that automatic load, that quick loading feature when you're loading film. So it's something we've become accustomed to, but it's kind of rare on these old school mechanical manual focus cameras. Okay, so there's not a ton of negatives with this camera, but let's go through the few negatives I could think of. Okay, first, one downside of the build quality is the weight. This thing is heavy. It's noticeably heavier than the cameras like the AT1, the AE1, or AE1 program. There's a noticeable weight difference between them. I'll be honest, sometimes that discourages me from grabbing it. If I'm in the mood to just have something light, easier to pack, if I already have a heavy bag and I don't want to add a ton more weight to the bag, I'll go with one of these smaller, lighter cameras. So sometimes weight can be an issue for me, but not always. The other benefits usually outweigh that. Okay, another downside of this camera for me is the max shutter speed is only 1/1000th. That's not too surprising for a mechanical film camera from this era, but if I'm making a wish list and being really nitpicky about what I would like this to have, it would be nice if it went up at least to 1/2000th. And that's one of the differentiating factors between this and the F1. The F1 models went up to 1/2000th. Another negative of this is that the fastest ASA speed on the light meter is 2000, as opposed to 3200 on some other camera models. If you have this and you want to shoot 3200, you can always meter at 1600 and then compensate that extra stop in your head and just adjust. Or use another light meter anyways. Another negative is that you can't change the focusing screens in this camera, as opposed to the F1 and some other cameras that they had, as well as some of the Nikons. A lot of the Nikons you can change focusing screens. It also takes an odd shaped battery that's not easy to find, like at a Walmart or Walgreens or anything like that. Usually you have to go to a special battery store or order them online. But online they're not hard to find. And one negative I don't see mentioned a ton online is the fact that the shutter speed dial isn't super easy to turn with one finger. And as a matter of fact, at least on my version of this specific one that I have, it's depending on where your finger is placed, it becomes very, very difficult to turn with one finger. That's not a deal breaker. It doesn't take very much to put up two fingers and rotate it to where you need it to be. But when compared that to like the Nikon F3 or even like the FM models from Nikon, those have just a smooth shutter speed dial that makes it super easy to operate with one hand, have one hand on the lens and the other hand on the right side of the camera and just spin it like this as you're looking through the viewfinder. This one you kind of have to prop it up like this, move your hand up and go like this. Like I said, it's not a huge deal, but slows you down just enough, especially when you're used to operating a camera a different way. But that's it for the negatives of this camera. I bought this camera a little over 5 years ago, and since then the used prices online have been all over the map. Right now I think you can find them anywhere from like $15 up to $60. I don't see a ton more than that, but it also depends on which lens, if any, they have included. This is a very usable camera and I do shoot with it, but even if I didn't, I think it's a great collector's item. It may never be worth a ton of money. It's just a cool piece of history of 35mm film cameras from Canon. In my mind, it's a better starter camera than the AE1 or AE1 program for a few reasons. The match needle metering system is a huge one. I think learning with that match needle metering system can teach you a lot on how to shoot. You get used to the idea of adjusting aperture and shutter speed to get your exposure to where you need to be. It's also great for beginners because if you just want to go out and use the Sunny 16 rule and ignore the meter, you don't even need a battery for it. You can just take it out and shoot. As long as you have a lens and some film, you're good to go. It's also for anyone who appreciates this kind of build quality and design. It's one of the reasons why I shoot Fujifilm for my digital cameras right now, because I appreciate the effort they put into the build quality. And nobody makes cameras like this anymore for a reason, because these things are heavy, but the Fujifilm cameras get close to this kind of feel for me. And if you appreciate that kind of design and effort into the build quality, this is a great camera to add to your kit. This is for anyone who wants to try FD lenses and doesn't have a camera body to put them on. You can get this body for really cheap and then spend more money on a great lens or a couple of great lenses and have a really, really affordable, high quality film camera setup. The Nikon glass gets a lot of love, and rightfully so. Those Nikon old school lenses are amazing, but don't sleep on the old school FD lenses. They're great and oftentimes can be found at a great, great price. So having a body like this to put those lenses on is a good thing. So overall, this is just a great choice for a 35mm mechanical film camera. Yes, it's vintage, but it holds up very well today, and it's just as useful today as it was back then. So if you see one of these on the used market at a good price and it's in good condition, there's no reason why you shouldn't pick it up and add it to your collection. It's extremely underrated. It's a great camera and oftentimes at a really, really good value. So that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this review of the FTb-N QL. If you did and you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do so. Please check out my previous videos and stay tuned for more reviews of Canon's FD film cameras. Thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.